Hey everybody, this is Ryan McClanahan with historythroughcards.com. I hope you're all doing very well today. You guys probably know by now that a New York state rep by the name of Patick Ryan sent a letter to the Federal Trade Commission, and this letter is very, very interesting today, and I wanted to not only read this entire letter to you guys. It's not that big, probably like 3 pages or so, but I do have a background in investigating business and monopolies and the law and writing about this stuff, which I've done extensively. And if you guys have followed my channel, you know that I've kind of explained some of this in past videos. And I wanted to go over this a little bit today with you guys and give you my take. Now, a lot of other YouTubers, hobby content creators have discussed this, some maybe at length. I know John from John's Cards and Collectibles has done a really great job at just kind of like going through some of the stuff. And I'm gonna send a link below to his channel because I think you guys would really enjoy his takes on this. And I have commented on a few of his videos. Really interesting stuff he comes out with. I really do enjoy it, tell you the truth. And then you have Neo, and I've kind of had a few interactions with him. I I would say kind of negatively, tell you the truth. I'm not going to attack Neo. Obviously, I don't know. The only one I will make an exception to is Jeff Wilson. And I even hate to do that, but there's a reason why I don't go as far as the sports card radio guys did as far as attacking Jeff Wilson. If I do so, it's because he's wrong in a lot of ways, and I try to explain to you guys exactly why that is the case. Unfortunately, Jeff Wilson, he disclosed the fact that he is a minority owner in Collectors Holdings or PSA, and that he gaslighted his viewership and tried to kind of tell you guys or his viewers, who could be mine for all I know, that everybody's mistaken except for him apparently on this, and that he has an invested interest in what is going on, financial interest, that is. But he did at least disclose that he is a minority owner, and that he has a PSA booth at his shop. So you need to know that. But I'm going to go through this, and again, like I don't really enjoy attacking other content creators, only because uh, you know, I could always be attacked too for the and and all that other awesome stuff that I do, and it's not a good look. It really isn't. If I have something to say to somebody, I'll at least say it to their face. I don't think Jeff really reads my takes anyway. I don't think he really cares, to be honest, and that's fine too. But this, I think, is going to be really interesting, and I have a lot to say about this at the very end. So stick around. Here we go. This is from Patick Ryan, December 19th, 2025, to the Honorable Andrew N. Ferguson, Chairman of the Federal Trade Commission. Dear Chairman Ferguson, I am writing to formally request that the Federal Trade Commission initiate an investigation into Collectors Holdings for its aggressive roll-up strategy within the trading card grading industry. By systematically acquiring its primary competitors, Collectors has effectively dismantled market competition. If its purchase of Beckett goes through, Collectors will control over 80% of the industry's volume. This consolidation, paired with deep vertical integration, threatens the objectivity of the multi-billion-dollar collectibles market, suppresses labor mobility for professional graders, and leaves consumers and small businesses with virtually no alternative for essential authentication services. The collector's industry has evolved from a niche hobby into a sophisticated asset class where the financial value of an item is inexorably tied to its grade or certified condition. Third party grading serves as the essential market infrastructure for this industry, providing the objective authentication and preservation that enables liquidity and price discovery. Because a single grade point can represent a difference of tens of thousands of dollars in value, the integrity and independence of the grading process are paramount. Collector's strategy of consolidation and integration has given it the power to manipulate the value of the underlying assets, dictate terms to thousands of small businesses, and control the standards of an entire financial ecosystem. Collector's trading card takeover. In less than 5 years, Collectors has systematically eliminated its competitors through serial acquisitions. Following the 2021 acquisition of PSA, the company acquired SGC in February 2024 and has now announced the acquisition of Beckett in December 2025. This pattern has resulted in a staggering concentration of power. Current data indicates PSA holds a 72% market share, 8.89 million cards. SGC holds 8%, 962,000 cards, and Beckett holds 3%, 366,000 cards. Collectively, these brands represent approximately 83% of the total market volume. If the Beckett deal is allowed to close, CGC cards will remain the only independent competitor of scale with roughly 17% of the market. The SGC acquisition serves as a cautionary tale for the pending Beckett transaction. Despite initial assurances of independence, SGC leadership departed shortly after the merger. Resources were diverted to PSA, and SGC's grading volume plummeted by 61% in just 2 months. Collectors is now offering identical assurances regarding Beckett, following a predictable pattern of acquiring a rival, promising independence, and subsequently dismantling the competitive constraint. The Beckett transaction is particularly suspicious given its recent history. After being acquired by Collectivist Holdings in late 2024 with $250 million in private equity backing, it was flipped to Collectors less than a year later. This rapid sequence raises serious questions about whether Collectivist functioned as a pass-through entity designed to evade regulatory scrutiny. Collector's dominance is compounded by its vertical integration. It controls grading capacity, pricing analytics through card ladder, and participates in buying and selling graded cards, creating severe conflicts of interest. These risks were highlighted in December 2025 when industry reporting described allegations that PSA purchased PSA 9 graded cards and regraded them as PSA 10s for resale at a significant financial gain. While PSA characterized the incident as isolated, it illustrates the structural dangers of allowing a dominant grader to identify, acquire, and reintroduce high-value inventory before normal price discovery. With control over three supposedly independent brands as well as critical trading card inputs, Collectors can now coordinate pricing to suppress competition, influence grade populations to protect market values of internal inventory, and leverage internal data to maximize corporate profit at the expense of consumers. This consolidation threatens the livelihoods of thousands of small businesses, including local card shops, dealers, and auction houses, who no longer have competitive alternatives for essential services. The impact extends to the labor market as well. By controlling nearly all large-scale grading platforms, Collectors effectively dictates the employment terms for professional graders. This dominance suppresses labor mobility and makes it virtually impossible for new independent competitors to attract the specialized talent required to enter the market, thereby raising insurmountable barriers to entry. FTC investigation. Collector's conduct appears to be clear violation of Section 7 of the Clayton Act and Section 5 of the FTC Act. The 2023 merger guidelines recognize that a firm may violate the antitrust laws through a series of acquisitions that cumulatively harm competition, even if no single transaction independently triggers liability. The FTC's 2022 policy statement confirms that serial acquisitions producing these harms constitute unfair methods of competition. The Commission should investigate. And here are the bullet points. Monopolization, whether Collectors acquired SGC and Beckett specifically to eliminate competition, and whether internal documents reveal a deliberate strategy of monopolization. Serial acquisition pattern, whether Collectors' systematic roll-up strategy violates Section 5 of the FTC Act as conduct that inherently produces the cumulative harms of antitrust laws were designed to prevent. Regulatory evasion, whether collectivist holdings functioned as a pass-through entity to evade merger scrutiny, and the extent of Collectors' involvement in the 2024 acquisition of Beckett. Good faith representations, whether the post-acquisition marginalization of SGC was contrary to representations made at the time of the merger, and if those acquisitions warrant a court-ordered divestiture or unwinding of the deal. Erosion of competition, how the elimination of independent rivals has directly impacted consumer pricing, service quality, and turnaround times across the industry. Price and policy coordination, what safeguards, if any, prevent Collectors from coordinating pricing, grading standards, and competitive behavior across its three normally independent quote-unquote brands? Barriers to entry. What structural barriers now prevent new competitors from entering the market, specifically grading the control of the limited labor pool of professional graders? Market manipulation. How vertical integration, controlling the grading process, the pricing data through card ladder, and the marketplace itself creates unique opportunities for market manipulation and unfair self-dealing. This matter presents a textbook roll-up strategy, producing rapid and potentially irreversible competitive harm. The SGC precedent demonstrates the delay enables acquired competitors to be dismantled within months. The announced Beckett acquisition presents a narrow window for effective enforcement. Further delay risks permanent foreclosing meaningful competition in an essential market infrastructure. I urge the Commission to investigate this conduct and take prompt action to protect competition, consumers, and small businesses. Sincerely, Pat Ryan, Member of Congress. So I've read a few articles on this and listened to a lot of other YouTubers on this specific issue, this letter that Patick Ryan has sent to the Federal Trade Commission. And a lot of them have said that this is a nothing burger, that the FTC won't investigate, or some of them have said, why would the FTC or DOJ look into a small company or a series of small companies in a small industry making small money? So that really is kind of fascinating for several reasons. I'm not here to disparage anybody, well, except for Jeff Wilson. I'll make an exception in that case. but for good reason too. I don't like to disparage people for no reason. There's always a reason for me to tell you guys what the other side is like. So I thought maybe breaking this down a little bit further than I just did as to why I don't believe that a lot of these YouTubers are correct in their statements. So regulations on monopolies began on a state-by-state basis in the mid to late 1880s until a passage of the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, and I believe that was in July 2nd of 1890, and it was written by John Sherman, a Republican from Ohio, and he was the brother of William Tecumseh Sherman, a really famous Civil War general. John Sherman was the Secretary of the Treasury, and later on in his 40-year career, he was the Secretary of State. So he said something really interesting after uh, the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed. He said that he hated the bill and he thought it wasn't going to work. And he wasn't incorrect on those statements either. It was not really used much, and when it was used, the government they failed basically. There's all sorts of reasons why the Sherman Antitrust Act it didn't live up to its expectations as it should. Mostly, I think, is because after the Civil War, up until like say 1900, 1910, you have a lot of new technologies coming out at the time and a lot of new legal practices and standards that were being invented as well. I always say this, but when you enter into a court and you file, you can have everything correct. You can have the documentation correct. You can have evidence, but sometimes, a lot of times, it's not really going to matter, and I hate to say that, it's not really going to matter if the judge in the case or the jury doesn't understand what they are being presented. And unfortunately, this happened way too often in the late 19th century because you had a lot of jurisprudence, I guess, or judges that were way too old school. They were being flooded with all of these patents and copyrights and all this stuff, and they just didn't understand the technology in front of them, and they didn't know how to apply it. And one of the largest cases, I think, was the Robertson versus Rochester Folding Box Company from 1900. And this was the first Right of Privacy Act in the country. And I believe Louis Brandeis actually he wrote the standards for the right of privacy while he was at Harvard in 1890, and then it kind of caught on from there. But in this case, Robertson, she was a an underage girl in 1900, or I think this happened in like 1898, 1899 or so, and she she had a photo taken of her without her consent, and that photo ended up as an advertisement, and she was incredibly embarrassed by it, and she went to sue, and initially she won her case, but then she lost it on appeal because the judge in the case didn't understand the concept of right to privacy, and eventually that case I believe was like the landmark decision for uh, New York State to have a right to privacy statute, and that statute ended up being a part of the 1909 Copyright Act, and the right of privacy statute in New York was one of the I believe one of the reasons why a lot of these ball players had to sign a waiver for their likeness on a baseball card, and so that's where that comes from. But again, it was only because the judge in the case afterwards. He didn't understand it. And then years later, you have Johnny Mize in 1941 when he saw his photo on a 1941 double play card where he sued Gum Products Inc. And he said, like, was not given any compensation or any document to sign for my name and likeness to be on a card. And he lost his case because, again, just like Robertson, the judge in that case, the first case, so that case. Let me back up a little bit. Johnny Mize's case happened in two increments. In 1941, the first judge in that case put a stay, if you will, or a temporary ban on his card, making that card, I believe, short print. That judge ended up he get called up to fight in World War II, and so the second judge in that case said, okay, like I'm just kind of null and voiding what that other judge said because he's like, you sought the spotlight as a ball player, and so uh, you have no right to privacy is what he said. So Johnny Mize lost his case again because the judge thought that somebody who sought the spotlight, like Johnny Mize did, didn't have the right to privacy, which is insane today because, we really do nothing more than talk about the right of privacy cases, and at least I do anyway. I don't know if anyone else does, but I'd like to think so. Anyway, so getting back to Sherman here, so he really hated the Sherman Antitrust Act, and again, it wasn't really applied often, and when it was applied, the government, 9 times out of 10 would lose their case because of what I just said. So it was mothballed for a while, and it wasn't used again until 1901 or so, or 1902, when Teddy Roosevelt became president. He had obviously different ideas about monopolies than his predecessors did, and he used it to break up 44 monopolies at the time. And so his predecessor, William Howard Taft, filed over 100 complaints and went through the investigation process, which was at the time a thing called the Bureau of Corporations. And this was founded in 1903 when every business had to register with the federal government. Now, this actually begs the question, are companies actually private if they have to register with the government? And that's for another time and place. But you might want to have that one in the back of your skull, just rumbling around. And so William Howard Taft he's one of my favorite presidents, actually. He was a great baseball president and a stellar legal mind, in fact. And so he successfully broke up 75 monopolies, including Standard Oil and the licorice monopoly and the American Tobacco Company as well. And again, they used the Bureau of Corporations as an investigatory agency. Yeah, sometimes English is not my second or third language. They investigated these companies and brought the results to the DOJ, so that the DOJ could actually go to court and have everything that they needed. And so this is why the Bureau of Corporations was founded. And at the time when the Bureau was founded, though, there were people who were like, "Hey, wait a minute, this is kind of an overreach of the Constitution." But it did pass muster eventually, and that's another story for another time, I guess. Taft actually broke up 75 of the 100 or so monopolies during his time. It's funny about Taft too. I talk a lot about him. He was slated to become the first commissioner of baseball, and he really didn't even want to be president, let alone commissioner of baseball. I actually think he would have been a good baseball commissioner. They went with Judge Landis instead, and I think that was a horrible, horrible pick for so many reasons. Biggest reason I think and it's not even about his views on race. Landis was actually, he was charged by Congress for having two roles at the same time, and two Congress members wanted to impeach him, and they almost succeeded, in fact. And then he decided in 1921 that he would relinquish his judgeship, but he wasn't going to do that at first. So these two members of Congress drew up or drafted up impeachment on Commissioner Landis. So anyway, American Tobacco Company, they had a monopoly going back to 1902 at least on the books, but they were actually in several court cases back in the 1890s due to monopolistic practices. There are other monopolies at the time that were broken up, and General Electric, 1915, the Motion Pictures Patent Company in 1915 as well, that has to do with Hollywood, and the Federal Baseball Club, which was the Orioles in the Federal League versus the National League, and that's 1922. That's actually Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., and he was a judge from Massachusetts. He had a very famous father as well. That case actually goes back to 1912. I did a video on that, in fact, and that has more to do, I think, with interstate commerce than anything. And the question I proposed was, is baseball or was baseball a monopoly in 1912? I would have to say overwhelmingly yes, it was. More recently, there it was a another case that I thought was very interesting called United States versus AT&T, which is the Bell telephone from 1982. And this one's really fascinating to me because the government declared it a monopoly way back in 1913. The problem was that for a lot of monopolies, their breakup may be quite difficult, and these trusts are actually structured, or these monopolies are structured in a way that their breakup might cause more harm than good. And the Federal Trade Commission really has to come in, or the DOJ has to come in and kind of figure out a way how to safely break up a monopoly before they you can you can destroy anything, but you might destroy other things surrounding the monopolies, such as the economy or other businesses associated with the monopoly, or people's lives, their livelihoods, right, their jobs, and they might not even be associated with the monopoly, but in some form or fashion, they actually could be. So it took a very long time to figure out how to actually break up Bell telephone, and it was very, very difficult. And in fact, I was reading a couple of articles from the 1950s, and they were asking, like, how do we actually go about doing this? Some monopolies are actually left in place because the breakup again could be more detrimental, right? And maybe the technology to actually break up that monopoly isn't quite there yet. So the government filed charges in 1974 against Bell, and they eventually were successful in the breakup of Bell, and that was in 1984. I vaguely remember when that was broken up. That's how old I am, actually. Um, so again, like going back to like the 1940s, they knew that Bell was a huge problem. They just didn't know how to break it up. So uh, more current than the 1980s as the United States versus Microsoft in 2001, and they actually reached an agreement not to break up the company, but Microsoft instead had to share apps and programs and contracts. And this is really more of a contract case than anything, and an app case. And so this will probably be looked at when Panini, or in Panini's suit against Fanatics. I think that's where the case law is actually going to occur. but I think there are other cases too that they're going to look at in Panini versus Fanatics, and I think that's pretty much still going to this day. And a few of the other cases that I think that they're going to look at is the 1949 Bowman versus Leaf, and then the 1953 Bowman versus Topps contract case. So I've never actually heard of a 20-year exclusive contract. But if you guys in the comment section below, if you guys know of any, let me know because I'd love to find out what you guys know. Obviously, I don't know everything, but um, the exclusivity in the league contracts is, I think, on Panini's side. And it's one thing if you have like multiple contracts for different companies, right? So they used to do this like all the time back in like the 70s and 80s, where you'd have like Purina or some kind of dog food company issuing card licenses, right? But that actually goes back to Marvin Miller in 1968. He's actually in the Hall of Fame, but he's the one who kind of created this for the ball players. I think he was well-meaning at the time, but that's a whole different thing too, I think. But maybe not. I think some of this stuff is connected in some form or fashion where you can just kind of connect the dots here from case to case to case and see what's going on now with the hobby. And I kind of hate to say this too, but because I've been in the hobby for such a long time, that the hobby is circular, if you will. Like it just kind of rotates from generation to generation to generation. And I'll explain why I think this at the very end here. The Bureau of Corporations was incorporated into the newly established Federal Trade Commission in 1914, and that's when Woodrow Wilson became president in 1912. And he takes a radically different approach, a more of a legislative approach to monopolies. Rather than breaking them up, he goes to your Congress and your House, and he's like, "Hey, listen, guys, like, look at the laws that are already on the books, and let's strengthen these laws." Right? So they strengthened the Sherman Antitrust Act, and basically what they were trying to do in their approach, at least I think, breaking up a company is very destructive. If we can prevent monopolies, then we don't have to go and break them up and then cause a lot of damage from doing so. And again, like, there are a lot of monopolies that they just didn't know how to break up safely. So that's really kind of why you don't have a lot of monopolistic breakups or monopoly breakups in the 1920s, 30s, or even 40s, in 50s, in fact. And you don't have a whole lot of them after, say, like 1913, 1914. There are some. There's one from like 1926 that I believe was the bread monopoly. That one they knew. Again, that's another case where they knew about that going back to like 1890. And then the chicle monopoly as well, the chewing gum monopoly, and the licorice monopoly too. And they went after them, right? I mean, think about it, licorice, right? So why would you break up a monopoly that is very limited, like licorice? Like, how many products have to do with licorice? Well, the American Tobacco Company had a monopoly on licorice as well. You know, obviously had to break them up in about 1910 or so. And licorice was also used in smoking. They reinforced and strengthened the Sherman Act with the Clayton Act in 1914. And the Clayton Act was strengthened by the Hart-Scott-Rodino Antitrust Improvement Act of 1976. Section 7 requires companies to notify the Federal Trade Commission of any mergers in order to comply with antitrust. Here it doesn't appear to be the case if you read this letter that Ryan wrote to the Federal Trade Commission. Under the HSR Act, the Federal Trade Commission or DOJ can request what's called a second look investigation, and the company has to wait 30 days at least before closing a transaction. This letter is essentially telling the Federal Trade Commission why the deal should be put on pause, if not just completely done away with. And the Federal Trade Commission can actually do that, or the DOJ. So nothing in this letter states, or there's nothing that states that the Beckett deal will go through. They can disband it, and if it harms competition, they will actually disband it. And the Hart-Scott-Rodino Antitrust Improvements Act, the lead author was a guy named Phil Hart. And again, he was the author, but he was also a D-Day veteran of World War II and was badly injured on D-Day. He's also known for penning the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, and that's one that Ted Kennedy gets a lot of crap for. He really does. And my former state senator here, we used to call him a fat boy, but that's a different story altogether. Phil Hart, he co-wrote that, right, with a guy named Emmanuel Seller, and the latter of which is really interesting because he served from 1923 to 1973, and he headed the U.S. House Judiciary Committee on antitrust exemption in baseball in 1951. And that's when George Earl Toolson sued Major League Baseball. And he does have a card out there. I am going to talk about that in another video. Emmanuel Seller is a really interesting senator. Not only did he have a very, very long career, as did Ted Kennedy. I think Ted Kennedy was in office for like 50 years. At least it seems like it. Maybe 47. But the point being with Seller is that he went after the Ku Klux Klan, and he went after the trusts, right? The exemption. He was very good with the Clayton Act as well, and he knew the stuff like the back of his hand, which is why he and Hart came together along, I believe, with Estes Kefauver. Yeah, Estes Kefauver to strengthen the Clayton Act. I forget exactly when that was, but if you've ever read Estes Kefauver before, he was a presidential candidate, I believe, in like 1952, and he was just an absolute dog. I mean, this guy would chase after women like crazy, like a dog would, I guess. He also, the one thing I do remember about Estes Kefauver, because I did write about this guy, he destroyed the comic book industry in the 1950s with the EC Comics. But that's what I remember about Estes Kefauver the most, and not his. Oh, he also went after the mafia too. Estes Kefauver did, and that he was thrown off the committee for reasons I'm not going to get into here. But let's get back into the Federal Trade Commission here. While the FTC wasn't really involved, that's Mize versus Gum Products Inc. case, or the 1952 and 53 Bowman versus Topps contract, again the right of privacy cases. They did intervene on behalf of Flair in 1962 and wrote a 100-page document basically on the perceived Topps monopoly, which Topps in fact did have a monopoly from 1956 to 1980. And I'll probably read that 100-page case summary from the Federal Trade Commission in 1962. It came out in 1965, and it is absolutely fascinating. At least to me it is, but there's a lot of hobby history there, and it explains quite a bit, in fact. And so I really kind of want to get into that too. So with the 1962 FTC case here, they said clearly that Topps had a monopoly. It opened a secretive history as well of the manufacturers, which I don't think up to that point anybody really understood or realized the scope of what Topps was doing. They did a little bit in the press in like 1952 and 1953 when Topps and Bowman were going at it during the quote unquote contract wars. But for the most part, I think by like 1962, people had really kind of forgotten about that kind of stuff. And Bowman was no longer a company in 1955. And again, this led to the DOJ opening a case in 1974 against Topps. And Topps was broken up as a monopoly in 1980 by Judge Clarence Newcomer. That's another really fascinating story, and it's more current today. So a lot of collectors, dealers, YouTubers should actually be very familiar with the Topps monopoly of 1980, that breakup. And that breakup allowed for Flair and Don Russ to get into sports cards. So let's talk about the money. Some YouTubers have said that the hobby doesn't make enough money to warrant a FTC investigation, and that it's just made up of small companies. Very interesting, by the way, why they would say that or believe that. But if that were the case, Topps would still have a monopoly today. So that argument really doesn't hold weight. Uh, Gowdy, Bowman, Topps were all publicly traded companies at one point in time. To tell you the truth about Gowdy, we really know more about Gowdy through that Federal Trade Commission report in 1962. That was actually when Gowdy closed its doors for the last time. Essentially, they were no longer a company in November. And as a side note here, a lot of our hobby pioneers, our founders of the hobby, uh, they grew up in the 1930s, and they were collecting Gowdy cards. So that's what they knew when they were kids. But they didn't know anything about Gowdy as a company until after its demise in November of 1962. So, getting back to this, we know more about uh, Topps and the sports card financial histories because of this 1962 document and the Federal Trade Commission taking up the cause. Topps, I believe, went public twice, but we do have a number of their quarterly reports and their earnings statements, etc., from the time they were being sued. So that's actually something I don't know if a lot of YouTubers have actually reported about or seen. In fact, some of these reports are actually quite difficult to obtain, but I do have a number of these, and I do read a lot of this stuff, and it is, for me, it's fascinating. For other people, if you have a hard time sleeping, I highly recommend reading these reports. The report here that I'm showing you is from 1976, and they were making at the time in 1976 $55,748 million in revenue, and I think that's per year. So 55 million a year seems like peanuts, right? It doesn't seem like a lot of money, but the 2025 equivalent is 317,358,010.51. That's essentially what they were making every year. And I think that number kind of declined towards the latter part of the 1970s. But in 2025, the annual valuation of the sports card market is between 1.63 billion and 4.1 billion dollars annually, and slated to grow around $2 billion per year, and it's really supposed to hit $14.9 billion by 2033, and that's not including Pokemon or outside of the United States, which I think is really huge. I just don't have the numbers for that. That's really why I think the hobby is the financials on the hobby are and why the Federal Trade Commission does need to look at that. The hobby is not small. It wasn't small in the 1930s either. If you think about it, Gowdy was the first company that made $1 million profit in 1933 during the height of the Great Depression. We do have the financials on Gowdy from 1933 to 1947, I believe, or 1941 at least. So we do know how much Gowdy was making. We know how much Bowman and Topps were making as well during the 1950s and 60s. Going through this document to the FTC, there's a few points of interest here that I'd like to point out to you guys. Obviously, um, the evasion of regulatory scrutiny. Now, this is really fascinating. The Federal Trade Commission monitors complaints and industry trends, patterns, and they also mentioned PSA's purchase of the PSA 9 graded cards and regraded them. I know a lot of you guys have actually in YouTube have spoken about this extensively, and I find that really interesting. That is definitely a major conflict of interest, which I think they point out here in this article or this document to the Federal Trade Commission. This looks like price fixing as well. You're trying to control the prices that are paid as well through these apps. Like I think he specifically said Card Ladder. There was a buyback scandal brought up to the Federal Trade Commission in about I think 2000 in a court case. So the Federal Trade Commission brings this stuff to court, and the Federal Trade Commission told Beckett essentially that they could grade cards, but they couldn't sell them on their platform because it was a conflict of interest. They also mentioned here too that the hobby is really niche, and just how niche it really is kind of astounding. It's been that case since a very long time. I would actually have to say the 1910s, and I'm more referring to the card manufacturers. Everyone seems to know each other and have interconnections throughout the hobby, either through the auctions or the manufacturing, especially the printing technology and the printing itself, or now grading. In fact, you can usually connect the dots to a single source through the decades as well. And again, like it's really nothing new here because if you're in this space, you try to follow it as much as possible, especially the modern hobby here. Not so much the pre-internet hobby, the vintage hobby, as I like to call it. The hobby is very incestuous and it's very insulated as well. And this is where Rep. Ryan is discussing the barriers to entry because you do have a very limited labor pool to go from, and the level of skilled labor as well is also very limited. He talks about vertical integration, and it's not really illegal per se, but it can easily lead to monopolistic practices if it's not monitored by the Federal Trade Commission or the DOJ. I kind of mentioned it a little bit prior to this as well, which I thought was really interesting. He also discusses collectors or collectivist holdings as a pass-through entity, which essentially what he's saying is that it's a shell company. And again, you can think of the American Tobacco Company or most recently Enron. If you haven't studied the Enron case, I highly recommend that you do so. That's really where they try to evade the regulatory scrutiny is by going through shell companies. And so they mentioned that this was for $250 million in private equity backing, and that's where the Federal Trade Commission can use the Hart-Scott-Rodino Act and Section 7 of the Clayton Act as a second look, or to get more information on how that acquisition actually happened. If it happened legally or illegally, that's where they're going to look at it. And so generally, when evaluating whether or not a company might be monopolistic in their practices or a monopoly, they use a set of tools to prevent it before a breakup is needed or required under law. And so they use something called the Lerner Index, which is an economic measure of a firm's market power and calculated as a percentage. In this case, though, I think more likely, and I think the Federal Trade Commission has said that they're using the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index, which was first applied in 1945 and refined in 1950, but that measures the market concentration to predict whether or not a company is monopolistic. And unfortunately, they're not going to take the word of a lot of YouTubers on this, even though a lot of YouTubers have said and collectors and dealers have probably said over the last 5 years or so that this company is a monopoly, right? So they're gonna look at it with a fine-tooth comb, if you will, to see whether or not this is the case. And again, it doesn't look like there was a pre-merger notification, which is required under the Hart-Scott-Rodino Act. That is required to notify the Federal Trade Commission of a merger, and that doesn't appear to be the case. I think they discussed that. Representative Ryan here kind of, I think, alluded to the fact that the Federal Trade Commission, or he, was not aware of a pre-merger notification, during the sale to Beckett or SGC, in fact. So they definitely are going to look at that. There's also filing fees associated with a merger of this kind or a sale of this kind, which is split between the DOJ and the Federal Trade Commission. And again, it looks like they went around antitrust oversight for these acquisitions. And again, that's why they're gonna. I think they actually are going to look at this. I think they have to at this point, regardless of how large or small an industry is. And so the letter itself is way too detailed to be a nothing burger. And I don't like to trash other YouTubers because, again, like I could easily be trashed for the way I speak on YouTube. And I don't do that normally. It's just, I just don't like the process that is occurring here. Talk to myself. So it's very distracting. And I think I've told you that, guys. The only time I'm really going to trash somebody is, well, I hate to say it, even Jeff Wilson. But I think Jeff Wilson does this crap for views, and he gets on the nerves of a lot of other people, not just me. Neo, for example, he stated that he's not a lawyer and he doesn't know much about the laws or the history of the hobby, and in connection to legal matters, especially. At least I suspect that that's your average collector, dealer, or YouTuber. And like, I'm not attacking Neo at all. I mean, he's one of the ones I think that broke this case, other than Rich over at Sports Collectors Daily. So I'm not attacking Neo. Okay, I don't know Neo. He does some great work. He really does. I don't think he knows a lot about the laws or the application thereof or anything of this nature, and that's to be completely expected because I think most of your YouTubers here or card collectors, they have regular jobs, and so at the end of the day, you come home from your job, you got dinner on the table, you got the missus to take care of, you got your kids to take care of, you're tired at the end of the day, and the last thing that you guys, I'm sure a lot of YouTubers want to do, is to read over and pore over a lot of antiquated documents and hobby history that may or may not be found. You have to understand too, papers, the document, our founding fathers left us with documents that are scattered throughout the country, and so it's kind of like a puzzle with puzzle pieces missing. You're not going to find everything that you need to formulate a cohesive hobby line, if you will, if that makes any sense. They're not going to generally have adequate time to sift through all the dry legal cases, laws, and historical facts associated with hobby history. A lot of these legal cases are hobby history. So I didn't even hear of a mention of the tops being a monopoly or investigated by the Federal Trade Commission or DOJ during any time I was watching these videos on YouTube. That's not that far back, guys. That's only 1980. So that monopoly was talked about for decades afterwards, at least a decade, and it had implications, in like 1982, 83, 84, 85, at least 1985 was a year that baseball almost went on strike again. But one of the biggest problems I think I'm having is that we're doing a very piss poor job of teaching other generations and younger collectors about hobby history, which is one of the reasons why these things keep on happening. So everything from Don Russ and Flair withholding product back in the 1980s because dealers couldn't get it because they only printed as many sets as they had sold the year prior. It really seems to me that we're just going around in circles, and around and around and around, and not really teaching these younger collectors and YouTubers aren't really doing a very good job, I think, of teaching the hobby history. Maybe they don't know. Maybe I'm the one here who is, giving too much slack or too much grief to a lot of these YouTubers. And again, I really have enjoyed my time on YouTube, and I've met a lot of really great people here. So because of the specificity of the information in this letter, I suspect that my gut feeling is that actually that either a constituent brought documentation to Ryan's staff, or more likely, I think, is that a whistleblower or two whistleblowers or more whistleblowers brought this information to Ryan and his staff. Now, I don't have any evidence that he is or was a card collector. I haven't seen anything. A lot of people have actually said that this guy Representative Patick Ryan. He's a nobody. Nobody knows who he is. Why would a nobody senator call for a Federal Trade Commission investigation into the sports card hobby? Is he looking for XYZ fame or whatever the case may be? But in reality, I just named off a couple of other senators and congressmen that you've never heard of either. Phil Hart or Emmanuel Seller. A lot of people, unfortunately, the way our education system is today and the way that people are so busy today with their own lives, a lot of people couldn't even tell you who their own state senators are currently, let alone from 1910. I mean, if you could name me 5 senators that you're aware of from like 1909 to 1920, let me know down in the comment section below. The only reason why I would know a guy named Frank D. Currier is because I studied up on the 1909 Copyright Act, and he's the guy who wrote it. So truthfully, like unless you're a history major or you know something about the history of your state, most people would not know. Probably give you like five senators off the top of their head, or even I hate to say this, even the vice president of the United States. Our education in civics is severely lacking. It just is. I mean, it was in my day when I was in school. Even economics, like they don't even teach cursive today. So, and there's probably reasons why they don't. Anyway, I don't want to get off track here with that. That if whistleblowers actually did go to this particular congressman, and again, we don't know. There are gaps here. We don't know why he wrote this letter, how involved he is. My suspicion is that they've been looking at this for quite a while because it is highly detailed that there are enough complaints to the Federal Trade Commission or the DOJ or to this congressman, maybe others, to warrant a Federal Trade Commission complaint. Somebody somewhere had enough documentation to bring to him to have this document written in the way it is structured, because it is really too detailed. So my guess is that it is a whistleblower, and if that is the case, in fact, that it could be somebody from Beckett. People have said that there are a lot of non-disclosure agreements within the hobby. And that's why we don't get a lot of people in the quote unquote industry that are on the record and talk about this stuff. You really don't have anybody from like PSA. The graders don't really talk about what is going on behind the scenes. And so, like a lot of people say, like the NDA process itself has prevented a lot of whistleblowers. But the thing is here is that whistleblowers are actually exempt from the NDA process, meaning that if a person can't be sued for a non-disclosure of the industry if they go to a reporting office such as the Federal Trade Commission or DOJ. I always tell this to people, but if you are a whistleblower or you're thinking of blowing the whistle on your company, if there's something that you believe is illegal or unethical, go to a lawyer first and understand the risks, the pros and the cons of doing so. I think the whistleblower protection, at least in my case, because I am a former whistleblower and I went through the process legally, that is that the protections for whistleblowers needs to be strengthened for especially for reprisals, because that does happen. And when you're in an industry such as the sports card industry, it is very insular. It is very small. Everybody seems to know each other, and you could easily be blacklisted, I think. So that's why you should go to either the Federal Trade Commission or the DOJ. You get a lawyer first before anything. Discuss it with a lawyer to see what is possible, because quite frankly, as I said before, you could be correct in your statements if you go after somebody and you have all the documentation. Again, this is why I just stated, like a little bit before, that when you do go to court, and again, 9 times out of 10, I think court cases are really resolved prior to going into court. You could always be correct in everything that you do and have a solid case, and again, still lose your case. And we don't know what's going to happen. These things obviously take time, and I hate to say it, but American citizens, especially collectors in the hobby, are very impatient people. We just are. We want everything now, and most of it is because of the internet, because of eBay and stuff like that. I want to see where this goes. I think it actually could lead to some kind of interaction with the Federal Trade Commission or the DOJ, just based on this letter alone and based on my own experiences and what I know about hobby history. And so, a real quick shout out to John from John's Sports Cards and Collectibles. I'd mentioned him in the beginning of this video. He's done a lot of great work on this and telling collectors where to go and what to do if you want to file a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission or the DOJ or anything else like that. He has done a lot of really interesting videos on these subjects that I'm talking about now. And I highly recommend that you guys go to his channel and just subscribe. He's very entertaining, I have to say. So, John, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We'll see what happens. I also agree too with John that we definitely need an SRO, and you can go on his channel and find out what he's talking about there. But I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this, and any comments in the comment section below are appreciated. Just keep them PG. That's all I ask. Every time you buy a new product, you really should know what you're getting into, and it really is up to you to decide whether or not you want to purchase a box for $1,200, which to me is insane. But I'm not going to tell you guys what to do with your money. The problem I think too is that when you look at hobby history and you look at some of these court cases, today we might find them really astounding, but at the time it was really kind of seen as a child's hobby, if you will. Cards were something for kids. We didn't really think back in the 1970s that these cards would be as valuable as they are today. And the reason why all of this is being talked about now, at least why I'm talking about it, is that it may not affect me personally. In some ways, it very well could. You just don't know which direction this will go in. As a consumer of sports cards, I really collect a lot of vintage. That's where I'm very comfortable with. But a lot of other people, especially your younger collectors, usually like Jeff Wilson is the first person that they see, and they may go off of his advice and it may end up in disaster. I'm not trying to say that younger collectors are stupid. I don't think that they are at all, but I think that they can still be taken advantage of, and a lot of any collector of any age can be taken advantage of by the grading companies specifically. Now you have three of the four grading companies that are owned by one company. That definitely screams monopoly to me. But it's more than that too. It's the information, the financial information that you're receiving. Is it correct? You don't know, right? So they're going to look at that. Anyway, guys, I'm going to leave it here because I've babbled on now for God, well, almost an hour probably. And I really wish you guys a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year as well. And I'll probably have more videos out in the coming days. So again, thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate this. And if you have any comments or concerns, let me know in the comment section below, or just reach out to me. I'm always available for you guys. And I will talk to you in another video. Have a good one. Bye.